this and this, and I'd be like, all right, fine, I guess I'll go, even though I was planning on going anyway. And I think this is kind of the situation that we see with the affirmative team. We're incentivizing companies to do something that the companies are already planning on doing. I'll get into this with my responses. So starting off with Baden's first argument of nearshoring unimplemented. Our response to this is a very important inherency for us, which you can write down as over 2/3. Over 2/3. Now you said you had been judging for the whole last year, so you might probably know what inherency is.
Yep.
Basically one of the 4 stock issues, is it needed? According to Peter Hanbury, Jordi Churro, Carlos Cruz, and Scott Dobbin in March of 2025. Really quick, before I read the evidence, I'd like to say this is the same article that the affirmative team referenced in their speech as well. Ensuring supply continuity is the #1 reason for changing a company's supply-based location, followed by lower labor costs. More than 2/3 of companies are investing in supply chains closer to home, either through split shoring, onshoring, or nearshoring. Right now we see that closer to home, which is basically closer to the United States, is hard to get other than Mexico, Central South America, and maybe Canada. People don't generally go to Canada because the reason you nearshore is to have lower manufacturing costs. Manufacturing costs are still high in Canada, which means that these companies, 2/3 of companies, are nearshoring to buy the United States, which is what the affirmative team's plan does. Subpoint A you can write down as 80%. 80%. By the same authors, and actually this is the sentence before the piece they read. So they said only 2% of companies have fully implemented. The sentence right before that says 80% of chief operating officers plan to increase onshoring or nearshoring over the next 3 years, a Bain survey shows. So we see that for onshoring or nearshoring, it's going to be 80%, and then the piece earlier said that at least 66% are going to also nearshore. What does this mean? Well, maybe 2% of companies have only implemented their nearshoring strategies now, but there's an 80% of people who want to implement nearshoring strategies, or at least 66%. Now, I know what you might be thinking, I know what affirmative might respond to this. You might say, well, they bring up 3 barriers. They say barriers to nearshoring include cost and complexity, data visibility gaps, and regulatory hurdles. Well, subpoint B, in kind of a response to this argument, is 50% nearshoring. 50% nearshoring. Again, from affirmative evidence, about half of the U.S. companies polled that don't currently manufacture in Mexico, South America, or Central America say they are planning to move into the region within the next 5 years. There might be barriers, but 50% of these companies are actually overcoming these barriers. It doesn't say that this is blocking them, because if it was blocking them, 2% wouldn't have been able to nearshore in the first place. 50% say they are planning to move into the region. 80% say they want to, that they have nearshoring, I guess, aspirations, and 2/3 of companies say that they would like to increase their nearshoring strategy. What's the impact of this? Not needed. Again, not needed. And here's another point. My second response to this you can write down as how many with 70 billion? How many with 70 billion? I'm sure the companies would like to have extra money from the United States government if they were already planning on moving. If companies say there's 50% of companies are already planning on moving from China to Central and South America, and now the United States is like, here, we'll give you money if you move from China to Central and South America. Well, it's just like my thing with basketball. I wanted to play basketball anyway, but then I got all of these extra rewards because I acted like I didn't want to go to play basketball. The companies are going to be getting this money when they were already going to go to Central and South America anyway. They fail inherency, their plan isn't needed because it's already happening. My next response is when he said harm one if China is dominating. My response is nearshoring isn't enough. Nearshoring isn't enough. According to Evan Ellis, Roland Lazarus, Ted Picone, and Valerie Wurzcrafter in September 25th of 2024. Getting to the root causes of these problems requires a comprehensive and much higher resourced U.S. strategy. This could include more support for financial and social services, greater cooperation between law enforcement agencies, increased incentives for nearshoring opportunities to draw manufacturing away from China, and continued sanctions against autocratic and corrupt leaders like Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro and Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega. So that's 4 different things that we have to do in order to reduce Chinese influence. Their harm was that China is dominating the United States. So as the affirmative team, if they bring up a harm, they have to solve for that harm. If they only get rid of one of the 4 ways in which China is dominating, China is still dominating the United States, which means they haven't actually solved their harm. Subpoint A is not just economics. Not just economics. It's more than just economic influence. Nearshoring really only impacts the economy. It's only going to help in that way. According to Brant Benesca, Nicole Ritt, Martin Brown in September 11th of 2025, China is reshaping security cooperation in Latin America and the Caribbean under the banner of its Global Security Initiative. Launched by Xi Jinping in 2022, the GSI serves as Beijing's framework for packaging its global security engagement. Unlike traditional defense partnerships centered on militaries and geopolitics, the strategy emphasizes policing, surveillance, and governance support, an effort to distinguish it from the United States security cooperation. What does this mean? Well, in the first piece, it was saying that there was a lot of governments in Latin America that were in fact allied with China. But what we also see here is that there's other things besides just the economy. China might be dominating economically, but they also have surveillance and policing and governance support, which means they're involved with these governments in Central and South America, and nearshoring isn't going to solve this. Now, they might say that the leaders of these countries actually want the United States to nearshore. The reason for this is because if you nearshore down to a country, developed countries, companies like the United States companies, are going to make the infrastructure around Latin America better. So of course, the leaders of these countries want this because it's going to help them. They don't necessarily want it because they like the United States and they don't like China. They want it because then they get the benefits of the United States, even though they're still involved with China. So they get the benefits of both worlds. The impact of this is harm remains. Again, harm remains. Next, he said U.S. Pivoting away. Our response to this you can write down as pivoting towards. Pivoting towards, not my most, clever tag, it's kind of just the opposite. According to Mark Ludwitsky and 5 other authors in November of 2025. On November 13th of 2025, the White House announced a series of new trade framework agreements with Argentina, Ecuador, Guatemala, and El Salvador, representing the Trump administration's most active trade engagement with the Western Hemisphere this year. These arrangements include select tariff reductions, new regulatory and non-tariff commitments, and anticipated follow-on agreements within the next 2 years. Later on, it says these developments carry not only commercial significance, but also strategic implications as the United States seeks to reinforce hemisphere supply chains and counterbalance China's expanding influence across Latin America. I'll point out this evidence is from 3 days ago. Trump actually did this action a week ago, 8 days ago, where we are engaging with the region and we are fixing the problem. The impact is, once again, not needed. Again, not needed. So it's for all of these reasons that I would encourage a negative ballot. Thank you.